For over 160 years, YWCA has been on a mission to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. For all. That means women and girls across the gender and LGBTQ+ spectrum, people of color, victims of domestic and sexual violence, for survivors and fighters and builders of all kinds. A tall order, right? Not with your help. As our nation strives to heal the deep wounds of racial injustice and the COVID-19 pandemic continues to disrupt our lives, YWCA's work has never been more urgent. Women have been hit hard by lost jobs, lost wages, and lost childcare. Girls are experiencing unprecedented mental health challenges, and communities of color are struggling under the weight of COVID-19's disparate impact on their health and the devastation of racial injustice. At YWCA, we hear their voices every day. We work directly with real people living real lives. We know that the crises facing our nation right now are enormous. But together, we have the power to make a difference, to give communities the resources to rebuild so that women and girls can thrive. Yes, together, because none of us can go it alone. With your help, we can pass legislation and establish policies that women know will make a difference in their lives. We can bolster childcare and early learning programs for working mothers. We can protect survivors of violence of all kinds. We can build economic security, fair workplaces, racial equity, and mental health support for women and families in need. With your help, we can mend the pieces of our fractured nation. Sit with us. Let's talk about the path forward. Let's rebuild together.
Hello and good afternoon. I'm Charmin Goins, CEO of YWCA of Greater Atlanta. I'm honored to be with you here today to commemorate our annual Stand Against Racism. Stand Against Racism takes place annually in April and is a signature campaign of YWCA to raise awareness about the negative impact of institutional and structural racism and to build community among those who work for racial justice. Like YWCAs across the country, standing against racism is an important aspect of our mission-driven work to eliminate racism and empower women at YWCA of Greater Atlanta. YWCA of Greater Atlanta has a long history of elevating the perspectives and experiences of people of color, having been founded on the campus of Spelman College in 1902, the nation's only institution of higher education founded specially to educate Black women. Our very foundation is built upon mobilizing diverse groups of women leaders to identify community problems, advocate for solutions, and create more equitable communities in Georgia. Through our Georgia Women's Policy Institute, GWPI, YWCA of Greater Atlanta examines public policies through a racial and gender lens and advocates for legislation that would make our state safer and more equitable. We advocated for bills like SB 201, the Family Care Act, which allows for the use of sick leave to care for ill family members, which passed in 2017. During the most recent legislative session, our GWPI fellows advocated for SB 338, which extends postpartum Medicaid from 6 months to 12 months after the end of pregnancy. This bill passed and is just awaiting approval, waiting signature of the governor. It will improve the lives of Black women as they are 3 times as likely to die from complications related to pregnancy than white women, largely due to disparities in healthcare. Since 2014, we have hosted forums on race and gender called Conversations. We bring together a diverse group of community, civic, corporate, and educational stakeholders who are willing to have frank and, yes, uncomfortable conversations. And they resolve to make changes to help break down the barriers at the intersection of race and gender. Such notables as Dr. Ibram Kendi and Dr. Beverly Tatum, who are experts in this space, have been our guest speakers. Today, I am honored to introduce to you a global thought leader, strategist, solutionist, orator, peace advocate, and CEO of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, the King Center, and friend of YWCA of Greater Atlanta, Dr. Bernice A. King. As the leader of the King Center, which was founded by her mother as the official living memorial to the life, work, and legacy of her father, Dr. King continues to advance her parents' legacy of nonviolent social change through policy, advocacy, research, as well as education and training. Through her work at the King Center, she educates youth and adults around the world about the nonviolent principles and strategies modeled by her parents. Under her leadership, the King Center has implemented numerous initiatives reaching over 500,000 people around the world, including the beloved Community Leadership Academy, Students with King, NV 365 Education and Training, and the beloved Community Talks, a courageous conversation platform about the difficult racial and social justice issues impacting our world. Dr. King is an innovative, inspirational, and transformational leader dedicated to ensuring that her parents' legacy and teachings, the King Center, and the work of creating the beloved community with Nonviolence 365 as the pathway are introduced to new generations of influencers. Joined in conversation today with Dr. King is our own racial justice powerhouse, Margaret Mitchell. Prior to becoming the leader of YWCA USA, Margaret served as the president and CEO of YWCA of Greater Cleveland, a position she held for 10 years. Her reputation as a tireless advocate for social justice and women's rights has underscored the important work of YWCAs across the country and serves to raise our national profile as a leader in racial justice and gender equity. Not only does she bring her experience as a collaborative, innovative, and passionate leader to the helm, but she also brings a decade of on-the-ground experience, including direct interaction with the women, girls, and communities we serve to ensure that staff and volunteers who get up and do the work of justice every single day have the resources and support they need. A voice and experience that is vital to our journey ahead as we work to embody a mission to eliminate racism and empower women. In today's conversation, we will also uplift the work of YWCAs across the country that continue to lead the way and innovate in the racial justice field by adhering to the vision of YWCA's one imperative commitment: to use our collective power to eliminate racism wherever it exists, by any means necessary. Through our collective power, YWCAs across the country provide direct service to, collaborate with, and advocate on behalf of the most vulnerable people in our society, including low-wage workers, the unemployed, women and girls, people of color, English language learners, unhoused folks, immigrants, and survivors of abuse. With that, it is my honor to present to you Dr. Bernice A. King and Margaret Mitchell.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal and born with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But all too often, that truth is forgotten. All too often, those rights are ignored, as all too many stand in silence and all too many suffer alone. So our work goes on until the land of the free is free of racism, until the home of the brave is brave enough to change, until by the people and for the people means doing right by all the people, until justice just is.
Please welcome to the stage the Chief Executive Officer of the King Center, Dr. Bernice A. King, and CEO of the YWCA USA, Margaret Mitchell.
Hi, Dr. King. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you today?
Doing well. I know you are just off of the commemoration for Coretta Scott King, the founder of the King Center, to commemorate her 95th birthday. That must have been a wonderful celebration.
It was. Had an opportunity to talk to some wonderful people from two different generations of time that are part of, I say, the freedom struggle of continuing to advance the work of equity and justice. And I was excited to be a part of that conversation in honor of my mother. I always loved doing things in her memory to advance her legacy. And so it was great to be with my sisters on yesterday, or last evening, should I say.
She was an incredible activist, and not only she was an activist in the role of human rights, but also environmental justice. She was very, very early in that space, in my opinion, and just a giant for women, the planet, for people, human dignity, just an incredible activist. Her book, My Life, My Love, My Legacy, I can't recommend it enough to others. It's just an incredible story.
It is.
Incredible life.
And believe it or not, when I was working with Dr. Barbara Reynolds on the book, there were about close to 300 pages we had to extract.
Oh my gosh.
So there's so much more to come. I'm honored to lead the institution that she founded at my father's assassination, shortly thereafter, should I say. And looking forward to getting her papers processed and eventually digitized so that people have access to the wealth of information, thoughts, and ideas that she shared with the world. Because as I was working on the book, I suddenly realized, wow, what is in the process with my father, the King Papers Project, which has taken, wow, over 12, 15 or so years, and more than that, really. We're going to have to do something similar with my mother. She obviously lived a much longer life. So, and with technology, we're able to do so much more and probably much more rapidly. But I'm looking forward to it because she has a lot to tell us, a lot to teach us. And I'm just excited and honored and humbled to be her last born.
I took a class during COVID, a Stanford class with Dr. Claiborne Carson. It was a class on the Kings, and the thing that I came away with was just a deep love for Coretta Scott King. I didn't recognize the depth of her activism and her strength, and just the work that she did over the years. She labored for me. She labored for me,
Hmm. Yes,
and
she labored for
totally in
all
debt.
of us. She did.
Yes.
She did. And people should know that she was an activist before she met my father. Um, so, you know, the movement helped to enhance the activism, but it certainly
Yes.
didn't discover it. It was
Yes.
there, and she was already involved in the peace movement by the time their lives intersected in 1952, and really was the consistent stabilizing voice and presence in his life at a time when he was seeking to determine when he would speak out publicly, officially, against the Vietnam War. And because of her insistence to him that we need your voice in the peace movement, we need your moral authority. It really gave him a sense of comfort and strength to be able to take that stance, because as those of us who study that history know, it was very controversial for a civil rights leader to delve into international affairs and administer that. And so many cautioned him against speaking out, but she was very insistent that it's necessary. And we know later, as was acknowledged by this nation, our involvement in Vietnam was a grave mistake.
Powerful, powerful work, powerful activist, and I'm so grateful that you continue to carry the work so beautifully and so well at the King Center. You have a new book and out. Be Love, I believe, is the title of your new book.
No,
I
it's it's
ordered it
it's
this
called
morning.
it's called It Starts With Me.
It starts
This
with
is it
me.
right here.
It starts with, oh,
Yes.
she's wearing the Be Love t-shirt.
Yes, starts with me, and she's
Yeah,
wearing the t-shirt. Yes.
wonderful.
We wanted to make sure that we would invite children into the campaign that we have been doing around Be Love, interjecting the notion of love as a means of addressing social injustice in our world. A lot of times when we think of love, we think of, some people immediately think it's about, can we all just get along, and overlook um, what's happening, and that is some kind of weak, sentimental, and expression of giving people, excuses and passes, and that's not true. Love, as Daddy said, power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. So there's a relationship there between power and love. And then he went on to say that justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. And so we decided, how do we get this message of be love to young people? And it was to publish a book. It's published by the King Center. I'm one of the co-authors with Dr. Kim Johnson, who is a children's book author. Has authored over, I think, 20 books. And we are just talking about the what love is, the power of love, and how this little girl named Amora, of course, amour means love in French. And so when I was searching out a name for the little girl, I just came across, I said, oh, we can do Amora. And that's how we came up with the name. So she's really teaching her friends how to open their hearts and their minds to allow love to kind of influence and drive their thinking, their speaking, and their acting. And then she's talking about love in different ways throughout the book. So we want kids to be on that journey because we know in the world that we live in, it's important that we sow positive seeds, and also whatever end result that we are trying to achieve in terms of a just, equitable, humane, and peaceful world, it really starts with kids. If we can expose them at an early age to what it means to live in a beloved community, what interconnectedness means, that, we are part of a greater human family. If we can get them to understand that within the world of the beloved community, there are things that you don't work against people, but you work against those things, those injustices and those inequities that undermine human dignity and value and worth, and help them to understand that, there will be conflict, but there's a way to work through that conflict nonviolently to get to outcomes that are win-win outcomes. So, this was an effort on our part to start part of that journey with young kids.
I love it. I ordered my copy. You can order through the King Center, and of course, the commemoration to Coretta Scott King is also going to be available, I imagine, on YouTube, but also on the King Center website. So I just commend both of those, the book and watching the commemoration, to everyone joining us today. But we're here really to continue our conversation around our Stand Against Racism, which we come to every year in April. And it's our opportunity at the YWCA really to recommit ourselves to our work to eliminate racism. And this year, our theme is Why We Can't Wait. Now, the team did not know that Why We Can't Wait is one of my go-to favorite blueprint books. I have read it at least 4 or 5 times. I use it as a reference. I give it to people. I point to it all the time. It is just an incredible blueprint, as I said, of the work that needs to be done. And I always wonder about the title, Why We Can't Wait, because it was powerful then. And unfortunately, it is still powerful today.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, because there is, as he mentions in Letter from the Birmingham Jail, there's a fierce urgency of now, because when you allow things to fester, as long as we've allowed them to fester in our society in terms of bringing people into full equality, you end up situating yourself as a society that becomes susceptible to increased expressions of frustration, anger, rage, outburst, and it diminishes you as a nation, and you lose credibility across the world. And so, when he was writing the book, of course, you're talking about 1963 that he was talking about throughout the book, the 63 time period, the Birmingham movement that he was leading, and then into the March on Washington. It was 100 years since the Great Emancipation Proclamation, and we knew it took a couple of more years to get the constitutional amendment in place. But when you consider 100 years and things had not really progressed, there was a lot of digression and a lot of cruelty that was continuing. Even with the passage of certain civil rights bills, they were just on the books. As we come fast forward to 1954 with Brown versus Board of Education, all of these, decisions were made from the Supreme Court, and then we had all these laws that Congress passed, but nothing was being implemented, nothing was being stewarded. We weren't talking about outcomes then. We weren't measuring progress. It was just about getting the law passed, or having the legal outcome, but nothing changed. for the conditions and the circumstances of Blacks in America. And so, he even stated how when you've seen these vicious mobs lynch your loved ones, and when you find yourself kind of stammering and stuttering, trying to explain to your young child, your young daughter, why they can't go to a fun town that they're seeing on television. They're being enticed with this commercial, but people that look like you can't go. And we've been dealing with this forever. We can't wait. It's now. It's not. Over time it's going to happen, because he talked about the issue of time. Time is neutral. You have to use time creatively to bring about change. And so coupling that with the work that I think God put him in our universe for, which is to show us the power of nonviolence to transform and bring about change in situations where you have, injustice. It takes that direct action, as he called it, or creative tension that has to come into play to begin the process of breaking the backbone of some of these things. And that's what they did. I mean, they broke the backbone of de jure, by law, segregation. Now we know that by practice, de facto segregation still exists. Our public school system in the United States of America is still very segregated. And how many years are we
Yes.
after Brown?
Yes.
Yes. If we're not careful, we're going to be 100 years after Brown versus Board of Education, and we're still. So there's some
book,
radical
says,
things that have to take place.
Yes. In the book, there is a line in which he says, "Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity." And that's so much of what you just said has to happen. And that the foresight, the prophecy, the ability to see what is happening now and to lay down such a clear path in the book to help us understand, to stay focused on the structures, not on bad actors, but on the structural elements of structural racism. You
and
mentioned
that really
the march.
is the heart. I want to mention this. That's really at the heart and soul of what nonviolence is about. It is not.
Yeah.
It is about the dignity of even your enemy, and staying focused on the injustice or the issue.
Yeah, you mentioned the March on Washington, and I want to come back to that. Of course, we know that Dorothy Height was one of the few women on the podium that day. Of course, she was there at the time. She worked for the YWCA. When I read your mother's memoir, I noted several interactions with the YWCA that she talked about, and that was just an absolute delight for me to be able to see the YWCA really taking an active role. Of course, Dr. Height would come out of that time period, 1963, and that same year, she would develop the Office of Racial Justice at the YWCA, which would go on to do incredible work, and work that we are really recommitting to and coming back to, and having a deeper understanding on our role and what is needed. But waiting is such a challenging concept. We certainly hear it in the I Have a Dream references to the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. And it is an adept metaphor for waiting. And it seems like we've been waiting for economic and social equality for Brown Americans and Black Americans. And I'm just sort of posing the question and a statement and wanting to hear your thoughts all at the same time around how important it is for us to come off the sidelines and move into action.
Yeah.
Activate our waiting.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something that my father said that I kind of repeat a lot, and I always invite people to help me to disprove him, because this is the one area where I'm challenging his words. Uh, I pretty much embrace most of his words, but he said the tragedy still, and of course he's saying this in the '60s, and it's true today too. The tragedy still of human history is that the children of darkness are often more zealous and determined than the children of light. I think there's a lot that people of conscience take for granted. Um, the children of light. I think there's we have a slow pace as well in the way in which we move. We are not as fiercely determined as those who would perpetuate unjust status quos and unjust situations and circumstances. And so there has to be a galvanizing of a critical mass, because Daddy understood the notion of a critical mass to bring change, a critical mass of people who are organized in a way that they are operating from a similar framework. That's why the work that we do at the King Center is so important, because I am convinced that what made a difference in their work and what's happening today is people had a philosophical framework. They had a methodological framework to operate from. And we are kind of, inviting people into something. And if we don't embrace uh, this philosophical framework that has the power and the strength in love to overcome and defeat these injustices, I'm afraid that that progress is going to continue to be, incremental as opposed to substantial. So, I don't know how to get people there. All I know is I'm trying to get as many people on this page, because Daddy felt very strongly that nonviolence, and my mother did as well, that nonviolence, and when it's fully understood and operational, has the power to advance justice and equality in a way that we haven't seen yet anything else.
Nonviolence it really is a structure. It is scaffolding. It is a system. It is, you are able to operationalize it. You begin to see that in Why We Can't Wait. And of course, the King Center is continuing to do that work to help us understand how to operationalize nonviolence. And it is so important as we see so much division in this country and resulting violence that we seem to be headed towards, that it's so important for us to really be able to come back and relearn, recommit, re-understand, remember that nonviolence and love is the path. And I just encourage my colleagues at the YWCA, this is a time for us to really dig in and understand the ABCs of the nonviolence movement. It's much more than just
And
keeping
we
your
have,
lips together.
yeah, and we have an online experience now. It's the first in the world. It's a self-paced learning experience that you can go through to really understand the nonviolence that was developed and utilized by my father, and how it can effectuate not just social change, but personal, societal, and cultural transformation. So I invite people to visit us at the King Center Institute.org and register for that course and go at your own pace. It's going to confront you personally. It's not going to be you going there, I'm going to fix this world. It's going to help fix you so that you become a much more powerful vessel to help fix our world.
You know, it's been amazing for me to see so many of the solutions, the recommendations that Dr. King put forward beginning to take root. One of those
Yeah.
being universal income.
Mhm.
And it is really exciting to see. Sometimes I think, what must that have been like to make this recommendation, in the 60s? This must just have been out of this world. It still feels for so many, there's so many obstacles and so much opposition to universal income, and yet it is really starting to take root. Of course, we see it in 2018, 2019 in Stockton, and the data and how successful it had been there. Of course, Atlanta, I think, is looking at doing some of that work, and now we know
It is
that in
doing it.
Chicago. Yes. Okay. In Atlanta, now we know that in Chicago, a large community is going to be able to experience universal based income, and the YWCA there in Chicago also leading and supporting that effort to get it launched, and the success of individuals engaged with it. And so it's just exciting to be able to see. And I wonder what it's like to be able to think about how long it took to go from the idea from Dr. King making this recommendation. This is a path forward. I know in Why We Can't Wait, he says, imagine a race. Imagine a race you're running, and a group of people start 300 years behind everyone else.
My.
Imagine 300 years behind everyone else. We need to understand that the repair work has got to be meaningful. And here we
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing. Young man Michael Tubbs, a friend of mine, I reached out to him in the early stages and told him thank you for taking this on, because I think that's what has to happen. Dr. King left us, as you said, a blueprint for you is Why We Can't Wait. The blueprint that I think he left that kind of encompasses all of his writings is in Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, where he talks about the guaranteed annual income and how it needed to be pegged to our median income and not at the lowest level. And as inflation rose, as the social income rose, you would continue to let it rise as well, so it would be dynamic. And these are early seeds of getting to that, and it takes efforts like this from people champion it and being focused. I mean, the what I like about former Mayor Tubbs is his ability to be, kind of laser focused in this area, in terms of his work. And I think what happens oftentimes, we jump around too much. Let's do what this is. And I'm finding that at the King Center, I finally had to come back center and say, no matter what we do, our focus has to be on creating the beloved community. Everything has to line up with that, what we're doing. Even if we're doing something in the area of economics or race, as that is triple evils of poverty, racism, or extreme materialism or militarism, it has to come back to that. So the reason it has gained traction is because he had that laser focus. And that's what it takes. It takes that pushing, against the prick, and I'm going to do it in spite of. And it's taken off.
It's a powerful thing to be able to see. And, you talked about the beloved community. Dr. King talked about building a coalition of conscious and the beloved community. It is such a powerful pathway for us. And, when I think about the beloved community, it is a community of unity, and yet unity does not equal uniformity. There is a level of diversity in the beloved community, and it's so important for us to build relationships, to build coalitions, to build tables, to grow leadership. It's just a key factor of being able to do moving work well.
And to do it even with in mind that nobody is disposable. Oftentimes we think a beloved community is like-minded as well. And that is not necessarily the case. When Daddy pulled his philosophy of nonviolence together, he studied many theologians and philosophers who had perspectives that were very divergent from his perspective. But he was open enough to see if they had any kind of threads of truth. And so he did find these, pieces of truth in different individuals, and he pulled it together into a whole. He synthesized it. I call him the greatest synthesizer of all time. He was able to understand in a profound way the adversary and the enemy, because that's the only way that you can bring people into a concept and a notion. When we think about justice, people have different ideas about what it is. When we think about a beloved community, people have different ideas. So we have to find a way. How do you bring people into that notion if we don't have a capacity to say, even if you are so adverse to me, I'm willing to work with you and see how to connect a truth that may be coming from you, so that now my defenses are down, the person who's the adversary, and I'm more open to taking this journey with you.
Yeah. That is so, so important. I know that this year we have held a stand against racism. It is our recommitment to eliminating racism and empowering women. This year, our stand against racism, we have gatherings and events and summits and leadership circles happening all over the country. We also held a virtual challenge, a 21-day challenge with our stand against racism, focused on critical race theory, livable wage, reproductive justice, and of course, representation in the media. Livable wage, of course, as we just talked about, and the universal based income. But universal, or rather livable wage, is something that I personally am very passionate about, know that is so important. I know that you are in agreement there. And I just want to take a moment to be able to talk about voting rights and how important all of these pieces, critical race theory, through representation, livable wage, reproductive justice, voting is the important umbrella in which all of these elements will hang. And of course, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, there's so much that we need to ensure is passed. We are a network of 200 associations across 45 states and the District of Columbus. How do we continue to actualize and activate ourselves to ensure that this bill is passed?
People have tried a lot of stuff during this process. We've done a lot of protesting to bring attention to it. We visited the states of two of our individuals who are in the Democratic Party, who, if they supported it, it would greatly help move things to where they need to be. But honestly, this is one of those issues where it's going to require some real crossing of the owl, or crossing into other territory, to build the will in other people, because this we've gotten to a place of toxicity in our political system. It's really about Democrats versus Republicans now. It's really not about being an elected official or servant of the nation. It's just about keeping your party in power, or challenging the other party in power, as opposed to focusing on how do we build a strong nation and make sure that all of our people, regardless of who's a part of our political party, have what they need to truly live healthy lives, to live prosperous lives, to live fair and equitable lives. And so I think we're going to have to consider, how do we spread out across these states and start, building, having these courageous conversations with our brothers and sisters who may not, who support people who refuse to support, this voting legislation. How do we do it in a way where we are not demonizing people? Because we do that a lot. And that just makes it worse. It intensifies the conflict. So, having those kinds of small circle conversations and helping to awaken people, because I don't know what else can be done. I mean, there has to be a contingency of individuals who finally say, we want a different kind of elected official. I'm not sure what we're doing now. I think, I'm not saying we shouldn't keep doing it, because I do believe at some point what's called a kairos moment happens, when God interjects in time and meets us in our activism and causes a miracle of sorts in people's hearts. That can occur. And so what people are already doing, by raising their voices in this way, educating, the communities around the importance of voting legislation. All of that has to happen, but there has to be a strategy on how do we bring that, not just create attention, but how do we also educate and uplift a community that also can help to provide the necessary pressure on the elected officials. So if I'm a Republican, for instance, then they need to know I support voting rights. So we're letting Donald Trump control a whole group of people, because we just written them off. Well, those are just those Trump folks. In the beloved community, you don't say that's just those Trump folks. Those are my brothers and sisters. They are in a situation where they are in the dark. They're being misled about some things. So what am I going to do to make sure that there's light, not in the sense of, again, shaming and canceling and diminishing? How do I really win these folks over? Not to me, but to what's just and right and fair and represents all of us. Because this is not a democratic issue. This is a democracy issue. And a lot of them are just being deceived. But as long as they think they have constituents that support them, they're going to keep playing these political games. Now, that's not the quick route, but hey, it's one of the routes.
Well, Dr. King, there are so many questions that have come through from our audience today. We've got over 1,000 people who have been with us, and there are quite a few questions. I'm just going to summarize a few here as we close out. And the first question being, somebody asks, what are organizations doing to safeguard the right to vote for marginalized communities, and how those of us watching can take action to protect their rights? And you really did touch upon that in really encouraging us to be part of a beloved community and not part of tribalism, not part of demonizing the other. And I think that
but also sorting through the issue and keeping people educated, because there's a lot of voices around voting rights and a lot of messaging and a lot of narratives that are false. When they talk about making it easy to vote and hard to cheat, that's not true. They haven't made, they actually, if I had been the strategist on this, I would have said, what your position should be is to challenge that. No, they've not made it easy to vote. They've made it hard to vote. not easy to vote. They made it harder to vote. And this is how they've made it harder to vote. And so they've gotten away with this very sensationalized and kind of sexy message. Easy to vote, hard to cheat. So we got to rip that apart. And then we got to elevate people to focus on the layers of what's critical here. Now, is it important that people not be standing in lines for a long time and not have access to some kind of water, beverage, and hydration? Yes, that's important. But sometimes we get stuck on some of the issues that we can figure out another way than the one that's most egregious. The most egregious part of this voting legislation is that the state legislatures can overtake election results and end up, creating a different outcome than what people actually voted for. It can just be something, that randomly they can decide, no, we need to go into this city, this town, we can replace an election board or whatever the case might be. The very thing that President Trump was trying to do, which was find votes, can easily happen now. That's the part that's most troubling for me. The rest of it is not as troubling. It's some troubling, but it's not as troubling because I think there are ways around some of the other ones, like the voter ID. There's ways around that. But this part is where we need to be highlighting and educating people about it, and then thinking strategically, how do we address that? Because we're going to have to change our state legislators, and we got to come up with a strategy and plan about how do you do that? Because as long as you have people who are determined to, to suppress vote, to make it harder to vote, in office, then we're going to be fighting an upstream battle.
Voting is the ultimate power move. It is so powerful, so important for us to think about and continue to engage. Think about the strategies that are needed, the strategies that we have to enact in order for voting rights to continue to be at the forefront and to continue to make it possible for our democracy to continue to thrive. I want to shift gears just a little bit because there is a question around you and what keeps you motivated in this racial justice work.
What keeps me motivated is something my mother often repeated to me. She said, "Baby, the darkest hour is always before the dawn." So I stay focused on the fact that there will be a dawn, there will be a daybreak. That if you just allow your mind to remember certain things. I tell people one of the most powerful words in the Bible and in our English lexicon is remember. We're not the only group of generation of people who faced dark, difficult, challenging, seemingly insurmountable challenges. And we won't be the last, but we have case studies from our past. And so many times I think we're trying to recreate, when we can draw, as you said, you draw strength from reading with my mother. There's so much you draw from Why We Can't Wait. We got to use those resources to give us the strength and the determination and the tenacity to continue advancing the freedom struggle and recognize something that is inevitable, and there's nothing we can do to alter this. Like, I'm forgetting the word now. Gravity. What Mother said, and that is, struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. So as much as we want to kind of rest on the laurels of anything we do accomplish, we got to always be watch persons on the wall. And you can take momentary breaks and pace yourself, but you can never totally disengage in the freedom struggle.
Dr. Bernice King, I take inspiration from you You are amazing. You're a Spelman grad. I'm a Hampton grad. You have a JD. You have a
Thanks,
master's in
Tracy.
divinity. You are an international figure. You are leading an amazing organization, an amazing museum, an amazing organization that is a thought leader. You are involved in what I call the duology. You are an incredible woman. And
Thank
it's just
you.
been a delight to be with you this afternoon. My friends all know that this is a high water mark for me in 2022. You are a warrior
Thank you.
in the struggle for social justice, and we do have to stay watchful. That is what we are called to do. I'm now going to hand it over to my dear colleague, Shannon Isom, who is our director of YWCA in Dayton, Ohio. She is also on the national board of YWCA USA, very involved as a board member at Antioch College, where Coretta Scott King, of course, and your aunt both went on full scholarship,
Yes.
which is a whole other story. One day I want to hear how they get from Alabama to the understory, because she tells part of the story in the book. But I'm going to hand it over to Shannon. Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank you
for
so much
everything
for
that you
having
do
me.
for this.
Thank you. Enjoy conversing with you.
For those of us who honor space, energy, and spirit, thank you for centering this time together for our learning and for some of us, our healing. And because we know that there is no movement, no next, no striding without our ancestors, our progenitors, we must honor the work, the daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the daughter of Coretta Scott King, and ask that you join me in remembering all those that have breathed life into you and into our mission. And for those who still remain nameless, that have dedicated their hands, their breath, and for many, their bodies for a betterment of us. I am Shannon Isom, the president and CEO of the YWCA, Dayton, the nation's first YWCA to provide a branch for the African American women and girls in 1889. And in 1946, we assisted in the adoption of the interracial charter, which is the progenitor of our national YWCA integration. I am a humble recipient of the Antioch College Coretta Scott King Justice Award, an award that gives me honor because it recognizes our good work, but it also recognizes Coretta Scott King, honored as due in her college days at Antioch College, pouring into a foundation of hope that had to sustain her while being a wife and a mother and an advocate in the service of justice. As a member of the Board of Trustees of Antioch College, I am amongst those alumni that I get to sit next to them. They were there, attending right alongside her as she built what is now her known legacy. I recognize you as well, a myriad of markets and communities and programs and leadership voices that are represented today. And whether you serve Native women, Indigenous women, Brown women, Black women, women of color, many of you are here coming inextricably tied to some of the native groans of your communities, the mourning of those that have been broken under the systemic structures that do not keep our communities safe, that target our communities, our cultures, our ethos, and therefore our well-being. There are some of us that are here who moan for our communities, that see our young not getting old enough due to violence, and are old enough to know that the weight of race and culture and ethnicity and generational structural poverty is always present with violence. We will not ignore, not today, that we are entering into this room, that we have been in this space and we've been in this work with women who already are carrying and acknowledging and maneuvering and worrying and advocating and protecting and honoring that race and ethnicities and cultures are within us, that are all of us, and that we are all bound together in this work. We will use our voice, our time, and our space to point to the importance that the YWCA stands in the gap. And we stand in the gap for women and women of color, for Black women, and also for poor, disadvantaged, and devalued, those that have to prove their value just to have dignity. And that means that there are many gaps in which we are compelled to take a stand. We have to stand against racism. And we must do that in housing and employment, in education and economics, and in class structure. We must do it in citizenship status, in environment and climate justice, in mental health and addiction, in police reform and accountability, in voting justice rights. As a public health crisis, we must do it. It took us until 1970 to know that the one imperative mattered. And we will not be able to empower women without ensuring that we are also eliminating racism. Our mission, which has been focused on intersectionality way before the term was coined, we know that it must be moved. It matters. And that this declaration of the and in our mission has come with its own adjustments, its own pain. I'm probably like you, and I cannot tell you how often I have heard from our stakeholders, from community, from activists and critics alike in meetings and tables, in deemed safe spaces, that eliminating racism is much too lofty. It's just not doable. It's not needed. It's untenable. It can never be done. Why do we bother? I heard that it turns people off. It keeps them away. It is in these statements that then I am made to pause and to question. It is in these statements that we are all moved to silently conclude and deduce that empowering women, yeah, it's easier. And for some people, it's more important, it's less lofty, it's more doable, more needed, and yes, more abled. And we have been trying to empower women, sustained without a break, without a rest since 1850. It is in the and, or the deletion of the and, that is our disparity. We cannot let this gap win. We must unapologetically stand in the gap of intersectionality. The YWCA's mission has been calling women to do this since 1855, and it compels all of us to the injustices that we see amongst us and stretches us beyond to not just make a more just, a more peaceful, a more balanced place for freedom of all people, but it calls us to do the work of absolute dignity of others. And we know how to do it. See, we are the carriers of our load, and we are the refresher of our spirits. We can stand against racism and sit for peace. We speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all of those who are without voice. We work with eager hands, offering housing, food, clothing, and shelter. We never sleep. Our lights never flicker. We invest in our community, and we invest in our people, and we give of our time, our talent, our treasure, and we work vigorously with arms that are strong for the task. We are your sister, your mother, and your children. We are the first responders and the last ones to say goodbye and good luck. Let's stand in the gap to believe that community, and that we use our voice against violence and racism, and that we can eliminate racism, empower women, and that we will do this with peace, freedom, justice, and dignity for all people. Thank you.